Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on Thursday afternoon. Today is September 19th and today we are going to be previewing tonight's Thursday night football matchup between the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. We're going to be breaking down all of the keys to this game, looking at the game from both the perspective of the Jets and the Patriots, who are obviously in very different places as of today. The Jets hoping to establish themselves as true Super Bowl contenders. What can they show tonight and in these coming weeks to do so? On the other side with the Patriots, all in all, a pretty good start to the season. 1-1, played Seattle very tough last week, but at the same time, the passing offense has not necessarily been there yet. Is it time for them to consider moving on from Jacoby Brissett and starting rookie quarterback Drake Maye? We're going to be having those discussions. Then we're going to be diving into some fantasy football insights for the upcoming week. We will be breaking down sort of the keys to tonight's game in terms of fantasy football starts and sits. And then we are going to be looking broader scale across the entire NFL slate in week 3 as to who my favorite starts are for the weekend. We will then be wrapping up the show with what was a very interesting and controversial statement that was made earlier this morning from ESPN's Mel Kiper Jr. in regards to the NFL intervening and banning NFL defenses from playing with two deep safeties. So a lot of traction there on that front. I'll be sharing my thoughts on that entire discussion, but before we get into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, and we will try and address as many comments as possible. You can additionally use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube to have your comment pop up on screen. If you leave your comment along with a tip or donation, it will be available for everyone to see on video. You can additionally do so using the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Help support us here at the GSMC Sports Network. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Obviously, today marks the beginning of this new sort of dynamic between the Patriots and Jets rivalry, division rivals, and it has been very one-sided for the past couple decades between New England and New York. But obviously, these two teams are now in very different situations, of course. The Jets now with Aaron Rodgers and what is overall a very talented roster. They are hoping to establish themselves as Super Bowl contenders, while the Patriots are moving on from Bill Belichick, which is a sight that a lot of Jets fans probably like to see. And they are now on with Drake Maye and a younger, maybe less talented team than New York, but they have been feisty through the first couple of weeks. So I do think that this will end up being a pretty competitive game, all things considered. Now, Vegas does not feel that same way. The line, according to ESPN Bet at the time of recording here, is the Jets being favored by 6 points, the over-under being 38.5. So just purely from a take all of the personnel out of this statement as well, of this game as well, it is interesting. You don't normally see a line that big with an over-under line so low. So that is something to take into consideration. So very quickly here on some injury updates for this game. Both teams had some big losses on the defensive side of the ball during week 2. The Patriots lost their best linebacker, Juwan Bentley, for the season with a torn pec. He was their leading tackler from 2023, a captain of that team, so a major loss there. And the Jets may also, at least in this game, be without their 2023 tackles leader in linebacker C.J. Mosley. He left the game last week versus the Titans early on with what's being listed as a toe injury. He has not practiced all week. Of course, a short week on top of that as well. So he hasn't officially been ruled out, but it feels like he's sort of doubtful at this point. And then the Jets also suffered a brutal blow with star edge rusher Jermaine Johnson tearing his Achilles, which means that he will be out for the remainder of the 2024 season. He was selected to his first Pro Bowl last year, recorded 7.5 sacks, which is the most from a returning player for that Jets defense. So a couple really tough losses there for New York. The bright side, though, as well, is that their first-round pick, Will McDonald, their first-round pick from 2023, that is, Will McDonald, racked up 3 sacks in just 35 snaps last week versus the Titans. So you're hoping that you can get some level of production there to make up for the loss of Jermaine Johnson. He's obviously expected to get more runway in this game against the Patriots. But the Jets also, last note on the injuries here, are getting a little bit of reinforcements back with DJ Reed and Michael Carter both cleared to play to help out that back end of the defense. Now, diving into the keys of the game here, the Patriots, like I mentioned, have been feisty through 2 weeks, toughing one out in a huge upset in week 1 against the Bengals, and then ultimately falling in overtime to the Seahawks, but to even be in that game, a Seahawks team that a lot of people think could be a playoff contender, is a pretty good sign under this, new tenure of Drake Maye. Are they the most talented team? No, but as of right now, they are playing extremely smart football, and I think that is the biggest key to this game, is how long can the Patriots keep this up of playing mistake-free football? Because last week was the second straight game that the Patriots didn't turn the ball over, which in week 1 ended a streak of 15 consecutive games where New England did have a turnover. It was actually week 3 against the Jets last season in 2023. That was the last time they didn't have a turnover. And it is the first time since late in the 2022 season, weeks 12 and 13, that they have gone 2 consecutive games without a turnover. And that has just sort of been the ultimate killer for the Patriots these past couple years. Of course, yes, the talent level has not been there either. And even now, I wouldn't say it's like they have this. They definitely do not have any sort of elite quarterback play going for them right now. Jacoby Brissett has been very solid, but in total, he still has less than 300 passing yards on the season. But what he can do for them is just be a smart quarterback that doesn't put their defense in bad situations. Because these past few years, I still feel like New England's defense has been in that upper echelon, maybe top 10-ish of defenses in the NFL. Now, last year, they lost Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon for the entire season. This year, no Judon, was traded in the offseason, and then additionally are missing their star defensive lineman, Christian Barmore. But even despite that, and now they're going to be missing Bentley as well to add to that. So there's definitely a real possibility that some of these holes could start catching up to them. But I just have a hard time believing that this Patriots defense is going to be a liability defensively. Now, you lose Bill Belichick, so inherently there is maybe some sort of a step back, but my counterpoint to that would be that Drake Maye is a player that his entire professional career while in the NFL as a starting linebacker for a Super Bowl winning team was with the Patriots under Bill Belichick. Then when he made the jump to coaching, he was under Bill Belichick once again. So I have no lack of confidence in Mayo to be able to at least philosophically be a good defensive coordinator / coach. And I think that, you add to that as well all of these sort of motivation factors where it seems like the team is very much rallying behind them. I think the Patriots are in a good position to be a really tough out week in and week out, and especially this upcoming week against the Jets where, yes, they are very talented overall. You have Aaron Rodgers, who isn't at the peak of his powers, but of course still the mental side of the game Rodgers has down pat, and he made a couple really impressive throws last week. The touchdown pass on a wheel route to Breece Hall over the defender, the throw that he had on 3rd and short to it was Garrett Wilson in the fourth quarter to help them sort of close out that game. You know Rodgers still has some of it in the tank, but one of the key differences, I feel like at least, from what the Patriots saw when they got gashed a little bit more in the passing game last week to this upcoming week is the fact that Rodgers, for as much as that mental side is still there and he can make some of those high leverage throws, we know the mobility isn't there. And Geno Smith had a lot of success last week when he was able to operate out of the pocket, move the pocket, and then keep his eyes downfield for those throws. So I think it's going to be a lot more difficult from New York in that sense. Now, the Jets have, like I mentioned, a lot of playmakers on offense. You're really specifically looking at 3. It's Garrett Wilson, it's Breece Hall, and then Braylon Allen, the 4th round, I believe he was selected, rookie out of Wisconsin, the running back. He showed out last week, scoring 2 touchdowns, and somebody that I think has the potential to be one of the most fun running backs in the league just based off of his size at such a young age. The energy that he runs with almost gives me a little bit of an Isaiah Pacheco vibe that I think that, there are pieces there, but they are also a little bit shorthanded in terms of depth at that receiver position. I just don't think it's going to be easy on either side necessarily, but if there were to be one sort of mismatch based off of what we've seen through the first 2 weeks, is that the Patriots running game should be able to have success against the Jets. The Patriots are one of the top teams in the league right now in terms of rushing yards. Ramondre Stevenson has been an animal for them for over 200 yards. Antonio Gibson had a huge performance last week against the Seahawks with 95 rushing yards. So they are 4th in total rush yards for a team. Meanwhile, the Jets, on the other hand, are in that bottom 10, allowed 180 rush yards to San Francisco and 130 last week to the Titans. So this is a situation where Robert Saleh, obviously now head coach of the New York Jets, his background is in defense, and he has expressed no concern in their lack of ability to stop the run. We just haven't necessarily seen that yet, and CJ Mosley is now going to be out for them. That is a number of sort of factors that makes me think that the Patriots can keep this game close. Again, what I said at the beginning of the show as well is the fact that a 6-point spread with an over-under as low as 38.5 points already sort of just that as a baseline fact does make me feel like this should be a cover spot. But then when you talk about sort of the other factors on top of that, I really do think that the Patriots can cover in this game, and I would not be shocked whatsoever if they ultimately win outright. But there are some other sort of game time decision injuries for the Patriots that could change things up on both the offensive line and the defensive side of the ball, where that could throw a wrench in things. Maybe the Jets do start to, build on the momentum that they really had. I thought it was from the second quarter and on of that Titans game where it seemed like they sort of came to an understanding that Rodgers doesn't have the mobility in the offensive line, even though it is improved from last season. It's still not an elite group. And that was also, for whatever it's worth, a tough defensive front from Tennessee. So I'll give them credit there. And the Patriots don't have quite as many A-list names as the Titans, but they are a young and hungry group that I think is going to be able to apply some pressure. But that being said, again, the adjustment that the Jets made last week of just trying to get the ball out on time, playing with not pace in terms of how quickly they are snapping the ball, but within the plays themselves, getting it out a little bit quicker, almost Miami-esque in the way that I think that Tua operates that offense for the Dolphins. And we'll have to see ultimately, whether or not we have the likes of a Mike Williams take on a bigger role for the Jets. Alan Lazard is somebody, he had some moments. He had a couple touchdowns in the game against San Francisco in week 1, but one of them coming in garbage time. I believe it was even from Tyrod Taylor. One of them coming on a little bit of a gimmick of a free play, a nice play at that. And Aaron Rodgers, again, that's where he shows his sort of mental strength in terms of being able to still operate an offense. But I have some real hesitations with the makings of that Jets offense, and I think that they are going to have to prove themselves a little bit more here, because the Patriots are top 2 in terms of total rush yards allowed so far this season. They benefited from playing a Bengals team that hasn't really established the run just yet. Then week 2, Kenneth Walker was out for the Seahawks, so could have been a very different story there if Walker was available, but I think we're just at a point where it is still so early in the season. There are a lot of unknowns, but I don't have the utmost confidence in the Jets in this game. I think that they win, but in terms of covering the spread, I think the Patriots can cover that +6. This is the Jets' 3rd game in 11 days. That is a brutal blow from the schedule makers there, and I think that this is a game that the Patriots can keep competitive. That's what they showed. Maybe they're not the most talented, but they can keep games close, and that's what I'm expecting out of this one. Might not be the prettiest brand of offensive football, but I think the Patriots can hang with the Jets in this game. Now, that being said, we talked about it at the beginning of the show. 2 teams that are in very different positions in terms of expectations. Patriots, more in the rebuild mode, but the Jets have expectations and they are hoping to be Super Bowl contenders. And that's sort of what I want to dive into next here, is looking at the Jets, sort of reflecting on what we've seen from them through the first 2 games, looking ahead to their schedule, starting with this Patriots game and beyond. Talk about what are these next steps that the Jets have to take in order to check the boxes of being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. That's what we are going to dive into. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are just hours away from this Thursday night football game between the Jets and the Patriots. And I want to look on the side of New York, because ultimately wins and losses are not really the end-all be-all for New England. It's more so about building up the vision as they are in this rebuild. But the Jets are sort of on the entire opposite end of the spectrum in terms of wins and losses this season are kind of everything, and not solely on regular season, because it's about playoff success. But for the Jets, I mean, this is a team that has been in a little bit of limbo these past few years of being a solid roster as a whole, but not having that piece at quarterback and just not being able to sort of get out of their own way, I would put it, to at least some degree. And now they feel like with Rodgers fully healthy and recovered from that Achilles tear last season, that now it is go time. And we really don't know how much longer Rodgers is going to be able to continue playing NFL football. So I do think that the pressure is pretty ramped up. We'll see ultimately how this shakes out. I don't want to speculate too much on what the future of the Jets looks like in terms of how long Rodgers can play and, if anything were to go wrong this season, what implication does that have on head coach Robert Saleh and GM Joe Douglas? That's sort of a conversation for another day. As for now, the Jets are 1-1, and they are in the middle of, obviously it's still early in the season, just 2 weeks in, but they are in playoff hunt mode, and they have a little bit of a hard thing to overcome, which is that, at least myself, hand up, I am a Patriots fan, so I probably have a different view of the Jets, a little bit more to an extreme than the casual NFL fan. But that being said, the Jets, I should say, also have been a little bit of a punching bag for the casual NFL fan over the past handful of years since the early 2010s when they made the AFC Championship game. So I think to some degree there is something to the fact that they still really do need to prove themselves in the eyes of the world. Now, that being said, the Jets internally could care less about what I or you or any NFL fan has to say about them. So I do think that ultimately, they are confident internally, but still the question is to be remained, should we be taking this team seriously until they give us a true reason to believe so? So, like I mentioned, tonight's game against the Patriots, I really don't think that they can do a ton to fully establish themselves as that because of the lack of competition against the Patriots. But what I highlighted in the last segment, and what I do think is a pretty significant thing that the Jets need to improve upon, is that rushing defense, because the defense has really been the calling card for the Jets in these past couple years. The fact that they've been able to win as many games as they have with such inconsistency at quarterback is a situation that, sort of speaks to how good and defensively sound that unit has been. But it's been a little bit unexpected how easily opposing teams have been able to run on the Jets in the first couple weeks here. Again, we're talking about a 2-game sample size, so it's not like you can definitively say this is who the Jets are, that they are not a good run defense. I think that they have the talent to sort of shore themselves up. Now, CJ Mosley may be out tonight, which would definitely be a difficult thing to overcome against what is a good running offense in the Patriots. And that's a team that sort of, you expect that is going to be their game plan throughout, is establish the run game, ground and pound. They haven't exactly had a ton of success through the air yet. So that's the area I'm really looking for the Jets tonight in terms of what can you do to stop New England's rushing attack? And I think that they are capable of doing so. But again, I also don't want to sort of fully put my eggs in that basket of, well, if they don't stop the Patriots' run game tonight, then they're not a good rushing defense. Because again, Mosley, their leading tackler from 2023, and Sauce Gardner has a good case for it. Quinnen Williams has a good case for it, but Mosley might just be the best defensive player on the Jets, and without him could look very different. But I think that, in this next stretch of games, they have, I would say, ultimately a very manageable schedule. It is at home against the Patriots, then they have a long week of rest for at home against the Broncos, another team that offensively looks so dysfunctional right now. Then in week 5, they do play the Vikings, which is a winnable game. Doing so in London does make me a little bit nervous in terms of Rodgers and his age and just the team as a whole. I feel like those London games can give us such strange results. So I think that it's a couple steps that they need to do in this next few weeks where they have lesser competition, where if they come out and win any one of those games, nobody is going to sit there and say, yes, that's the Jets team that we think can win a Super Bowl. They just proved that they can compete with anyone, because these are, bottom echelon teams that they are going to be facing. But I talked about the run defense. The other part is offensively, I think they need to find their identity a little bit. And not that they're totally lackluster at this point, but Aaron Rodgers is still trying to develop chemistry with his wide receivers. We have seen a lot of promise, especially we've heard a lot of promise behind the scenes as to Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson, what a combination that could be. And again, I sort of in the last segment highlighted that third down throw in the fourth quarter that Rodgers had to Garrett Wilson, and it was a beautiful ball and a great connection there. But even then, just the slight fact that you saw Garrett Wilson was looking over his outside shoulder, was anticipating the throw to be there. Now, Garrett Wilson is an excellent wide receiver, and he was able to make the adjustment almost flawlessly to turn back inside and pick up that conversion. And that is what we can see out of this group, that duo. But again, it's going to be about reps and getting to understand one another. For Garrett Wilson, you're talking about what is going to be a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and you have to sort of learn what he prefers from his receivers. He holds everybody that he throws to a very high standard. And Garrett Wilson, without a doubt, is a talented enough receiver that in that sense, he can live up to that high standard. But then it's about taking that and then going to the next level of developing an excellent relationship there. And that's something that we were never going to have an answer to after just 2 weeks into the season. But I think that it's going to be imperative that those two sort of get a little bit more on the same page. It's not that they're not on the same page right now, but we can also admit that there are steps forward. They haven't obviously reached their peak at this point, considering they have played 2 games and 4 plays of actual football with one another. And then, who else is going to emerge in terms of being a reliable number 2 option? Because at this point, Breece Hall is first on the Jets roster in terms of receptions so far this season, and he is second in targets, only behind Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall is an excellent receiving back, so it's not like I don't think that you can rely on that as well. But also, you would like to see somebody on the perimeter sort of take a step forward for Rodgers in this situation, where Allen Lazard, obviously a familiar face, he was tied for 3rd in targets during the team's game against the Titans this past weekend. But I just don't know totally how much confidence I have in Lazard at this point to be a fully completed wide receiver 2. Mike Williams is obviously a name that I myself am looking at. Still a player that obviously injury history, very extensive there, and it is concerning. He's not even 30 years old yet. Now he's going to turn 30 in a few weeks from now, so, a little bit of a soft statement there, but I would like to believe that Mike Williams still has good football in front of him. He's going through this recovery process from the torn, I believe it was ACL last season, and he's rehabbing that while also trying to develop a connection with Aaron Rodgers. And that's the thing is, the Jets end up winning this game against the Titans. They were also very much able to capitalize on the Titans kind of throwing up on themselves. I'm sure you've already seen the Will Levis lateral play that made the rounds on social media, which was a disastrous play there. And then there's a blocked punt in there. the Titans pick up a roughing the passer penalty coming out of the half that ends up extending that drive so the Jets can go and score a touchdown. So that's fine. You can't penalize the Jets for the Titans doing things poorly or any of their opponents sort of making mistakes. Mistakes are a part of the game. But it's just more so about the Jets having convincing wins. And like I mentioned, these are a few teams coming up here with the Patriots, the Broncos, and the Vikings, where you think they are a little bit less experienced. There have been a lot of moving pieces on all of their rosters that you should be able to ramp yourself up, develop a little bit more of that chemistry, and then, when they come back from London after that game against the Vikings, they are going to be playing on Monday Night Football against the Bills. And that's sort of where that measuring stick game comes into play. And at that point, again, not expecting them to be perfect then, but that's a situation where you are finally facing off against one of the best teams in the NFL and your direct competition in the AFC. I don't hold that week 1 loss to the 49ers fully against them because it's a Niners team that had a lot more continuity. No Christian McCaffrey, but overall still a team that is much more sure of their own identities coming into the season, week 1 versus the Jets, where they're still sort of piecing it together to some degree at least. And I think that, these next few weeks are going to be important for the Jets. Can we see them win convincingly? Now, like I mentioned, I think that the Patriots are going to be able to keep it close this upcoming week. The Broncos game is sort of the one that I look like. That's a defense in Denver that has been overachieving, at least to my expectations. The offense has been a mess up to this point, though. And that's a game where I feel like they can also sort of come out and, at least win convincingly. And not that they can't do it tonight against the Patriots. That's just not my expectations. But it's very much still on the table as well. So I think that, again, figuring out the rushing defense and then developing a little bit more of that identity on the offensive side of the ball. Those are the two things in particular that I think that they need to do to prove themselves over these next few weeks. And then ultimately, it's once they start getting into the middle of the season, that's when they start to see a higher level of competition. And then they can really have those games where they can hopefully go toe-to-toe with the likes of the Bills, the Texans, and those types of teams to really establish themselves. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. And if you think that I'm too low on the Jets as to what we've seen already, definitely let me know in the comments section as well, because I know there are a hefty amount of Jets believers at this point. It's not that I'm out on them necessarily. I just feel like I personally need to see a little bit more. But on that note, we are going to then sort of look at the other side of this Thursday night football game and talk a little bit more about the Patriots, who are off to a pretty nice start, all things considered, 1-1, facing off against two competitive playoff aspiration teams and have kept it close in both of them and have shown that they might not be an easy out every week like at times they were last year with some brutal blowout losses. But that being said, one of the biggest drawbacks with the Patriots so far is the fact that their passing offense just has not really been all that dynamic. And I know that at least as a member of, the Patriots community, there are a lot of fans that are calling for New England to switch things up and go to the rookie in Drake Maye, who showed out some in preseason, given limited reps, and are hoping that he can sort of be the face of the franchise moving forward. So I want to talk about, is it time for the Patriots to consider moving on to Drake Maye, or is this all a part of the plan? We'll be answering that question, but first we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to preview tonight's Thursday night football matchup between the Patriots and the Jets. And I wanted to dive into the Patriots side of this conversation. We just talked about, New York is hoping that they can establish themselves as Super Bowl contenders, and the pressure is super high on Aaron Rodgers, Robert Saleh, the entire coaching staff there, and really the franchise as a whole to be able to capitalize on this season. The Patriots are on the opposite end of the pendulum there, where they are just looking to sort of build themselves up and start to instill a vision as to what the future of this organization looks like. And through 2 weeks, it has been, all things considered, a big success. Now, they've been 1-1, so obviously that does sort of go to show the low level of the bar that the Patriots are hoping to live up to. But as a Patriots fan myself that has lived through, I know also has lived through a lot of good experiences. It's not like I'm spoiled and don't have any perspective there. But these past few years have been a bit disastrous and have been some ugly, ugly offensive performances. So there was definitely a need to sort of move on from Bill Belichick, as difficult as that was, and find a new image of what they are going to build their team around. Drake Maye, I think that overall, just the vibes with the team are so much higher. You got videos of him pranking his coaches on the sideline before their game against Seattle this past weekend and just giggling to himself. I think that it's just a lot more fun of a team to root for in comparison to these past couple years where everything has been pretty miserable, all things considered. But that being said, as much as everything feels really fun and, revamped, there is still a pretty glaring issue, which is the fact that they have been one of the least efficient passing offenses in the NFL up to this point. And that's not to be unexpected by any means, but they are bottom 3 in the league in passing yards up to this point, just 1 passing touchdown. So there are a lot of steps forward here that the Patriots need to take. We can agree that up to this point, only 2 weeks, but up to this point, the Patriots season has been a success and that it feels like things are headed in the right track. But there is a reality that Jacoby Brissett, for as reliable as he is, he doesn't bring you that star power that obviously in New England, after 20 years of Tom Brady, a lot of Patriots fans are holding quarterback play to that level of expectation, which, for the record, I think is a bit ridiculous to even consider the idea that there's just going to be another Tom Brady in the works. I think that a lot of Patriots fans are delusional about how difficult it actually is to, develop one of those elite offenses. But what can I say? Bostonians are definitely an impatient breed, generally speaking here. And Brissett has combined for just 67 passing yards in the second half of their past 2 games. Now, that's a little bit of an obscure stat there, especially considering week 1, the entire idea was that you somehow have a lead against the Bengals at halftime. Let's just try to, run this clock out to some degree and not be overly aggressive and just, see if we can bleed this thing out, which they did successfully, to their credit. But Week 2, I mean, Jacoby Brissett looked really good in the first half. He was very efficient. I am still impressed with the level of mobility and evasiveness that he's had while in the pocket playing behind a bad offensive line, that there are a lot of positives there. But that being said, when the game sort of called for a play to be made, there wasn't really anything to this New England offense that scares the Seahawks in last week, or just generally speaking, anything that should scare opposing defenses moving forward in regards to the passing game. They have a bridge quarterback is just basically what Brissett is. Not that that's an insult or anything, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation. He's been a little bit of a journeyman. They have a bad pass blocking offensive line, and they're really without any, top end wide just receiving talent in general. I've been impressed with what I've seen from the tight ends. Hunter Henry had a big week last week, but ultimately there's not a lot that is going to keep defensive coordinators up scheming late at night, because I think the Patriots game plan is pretty straightforward. And that's what sort of brings me to this debate about, should Drake Maye be getting looked at to take over the starting quarterback role shortly here in New England? Because, again, it's good to see the vision being built up, but it's clear they're missing that next level of dynamicism or explosion. And that is sort of what the idea of Drake Maye is, that he is a big body quarterback, that he's really athletic. He can run when he needs to, but his specialty really is more throwing first, which is something that, again, Brissett has done a phenomenal job of just not putting the ball in harm's way. I will note that he is tied with Aaron Rodgers for the best interception percentage of all time of qualified NFL quarterbacks. I don't know exactly what the attempts number is there. It might be 1,000, it might be 1,500, but Brissett is up there. And really, I think that more so just speaks to that he's safe. It's not like he is this huge ceiling raiser, but I think that the floor is a lot higher than a lot of NFL fans gave him coming into this season. And even still, it's not like he's operating under a great offensive system here, that he's just sort of doing what he can. But again, when you look at that second half and in overtime against Seattle, they're just, when the game gets tough, where, they were trying to run the ball more than anything in that second half, but if you get yourself into, a third and long, just doesn't feel like there's going to be an extremely high conversion rate on those types of situations. And that's something where we don't know whether or not Drake Maye would be able to sort of live up to those expectations, but it is a little bit of that unknown. That and again, Brissett has actually picked up a couple of these third down conversions using his legs himself, so it's not like that's totally out of the picture either. But Drake Maye just does have that little bit extra bit of flair that a lot of Patriots fans are clamoring for. But all that to be said, I would definitely, and I've been pretty consistent with this, that if I am New England and I'm the general manager there, I am trying to play this safer for just about as long as I can. You look across the NFL right now, and how many of these young quarterbacks have really been all that impressive? You have CJ Stroud, who's on a tier of his own. He's playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, which is great. And I've talked about as well, I don't know if I've said it on air or if this is just conversations I've had behind the scenes, that, there are some similarities in regards to what the Texans were coming into last season and what the Patriots are this season. Having a rookie quarterback, having a, head coach, a rookie head coach that had just spent, a number of years in the more modern-ish NFL and seems to have a really good grasp of what it takes to win. But, one of the biggest differences is that Texans at least have a good offensive line in front of CJ Stroud. They have Laramie Tunsil, one of the best blindside blocking offensive tackles in the league, that they're able to keep CJ Stroud upright. Jacoby Brissett already in these first couple games has just gotten beat up on, which is majorly concerning. And especially, coming off of a week where Bryce Young just got benched for the Panthers, I personally feel like there is no need to rush into this Drake Maye experiment, especially because sort of another example that I would use of these recent quarterbacks is that there are already a number of people that are sort of clamoring, did the Broncos make the wrong decision starting Bo Nix out of the gates? Should they have gone with one of the veteran quarterbacks that they have, really more so Jarrett Stidham than anything? Zach Wilson is there, and technically he's a little bit more veteran, but I don't know, how great that really would have gone for them. But I would definitely be playing the patient game with New England. I understand it's a really boring and lame way to go about things, but call me crazy. I think that quarterback development behind the scenes is vitally important. We've seen, especially for whatever it's worth, the Patriots are about to go and play the Jets, and they saw a number of, pretty highly drafted quarterbacks struggling with them. And now we're seeing Geno Smith and Sam Darnold start to have a little bit more success once they're removed, once they had time to sit and learn and sort of clean up their games. I was actually at the Monday Night Football game in what would have been 2019, I believe, where it was the Sam Darnold is seeing ghosts game, and it was disastrous there. And I think that I understand the excitement of it. Everybody's excited to see what it could look like, but I just see no reason really to rush into it. Now, that being said, we talked headed into this season of when would those landing spots be for Drake Maye to sort of have his best opportunity to succeed looking forward. You now look at these next two games. You are obviously in New York tonight, not going to make any sort of a crazy change during game time there. Then you are in San Francisco next week, very tough environment to play in. You could sort of talk yourself into maybe playing against Miami at home in week 5, but the Patriots have one of the most difficult schedules in the NFL this season. And as limited as Jacoby Brissett may be passing downfield, I just don't see the risk reward of it. Like I've said multiple times on this show already, the Patriots 2024 season is not about winning and losing games. Drake Maye, I don't even know if we can definitively say gives you a better chance to win because, we don't know what types of mistakes he could make. You know that you get stability from that quarterback position from Jacoby Brissett, even if there isn't an elite talent to go with it. But this is a defense that is trying to show that they can be one of the best forever for whatever it's worth as well. Gerard Mayo taking over at head coach. That defensive side of the ball is sort of going to be his calling card to some degree. If they are, in the positions that New England's offense put them in years past, that's not going to be a great sign. I mentioned the stat earlier in the show as well, the fact that this is the first time the Patriots have gone consecutive games without turning the ball over since weeks 12 and 13 of the 2022 season. Headed into this year, they had gone 15 straight games with a turnover. So as much as, it's a little bit underwhelming maybe to the eye, I still think that, underwhelming and boring is a better outcome than erratic and disastrous, which is what the Patriots have had these past couple years with the combination of Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi and whatever was going on with that coaching staff for a couple years, specifically looking at 2022 there with Matt Patricia being on offensive play calling duties, with Joe Judge being his right-hand man there. Just overall trying to steer as far away from that as possible, and I think that that's what Jacoby Brissett can bring you to some degree. But if you think that I'm being cowardly in this analysis, I'm willing to hear you out because there's a chance that I am being a little bit cowardly, but forgive me if I'm a little bit scarred as to watching the deterioration of Mac Jones these past few years because it was a roster that wasn't ready. And I can point to a couple examples, most, relevantly being the Bryce Young situation as to why it doesn't really do the team or the player any benefits to throw them in out of the gates when you know that the roster is not ready. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. This is an open conversation here, so I will be willing to hear you out. But I want to now sort of shift focus here from, the reality of football and the behind the scenes stuff to on the field production, and specifically from a fantasy football perspective, as I'm going to be giving my thoughts on tonight's game from, who are the key players to start or sit tonight, and then overall going over week 3 and talking about my favorite plays of the weekend. And we do have a comment here from Sebastian on the note of fantasy football, where he proposes trade Kyren Williams, Drake London, and Tank Dell for CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave. That is a very interesting proposition, actually. I think I would go with yes. I have real concerns with Kyren Williams, not for the talent that he is, but just that overall situation with the Rams. They've already seen 3 starting linemen suffer injuries that put them on the injured reserve list. We have also seen Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua be injured, which could actually benefit Kyren in terms of the touches, but I just feel like that Rams situation might just be a messy year moving forward. And then, I would imagine probably leaves. There's not a ton of running back depth, generally speaking, in the NFL for fantasy football this season, I feel like. But, CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave, you want to talk about a team that doesn't exactly have a lot of, depth at the other receiving options. CeeDee Lamb is going to be force-fed the ball all year long. So I think that he has Offensive Player of the Year potential. Chris Olave, that Saints offense looks so refined so far up to this point in the season that I do love those players. Tank Dell is the third option on a Houston team that has a lot of mouths to feed from really all angles, running back as well with Joe Mixon. You throw in some Dalton Schultz from the tight end perception as well. That's a tough one. I just don't know how great that Falcons offense is going to be necessarily. Drake London's a very good player, but I don't know. I think that the upside with CeeDee and Olave is so high. I do understand if you're talking about, lack of depth at the running back position, that's where things can get a little bit of dicey. But my general thoughts are you capitalize on the most amount of talent and you can sort of piece things together from there, that I feel like you could maybe even make an upgrade if need be. Sell off Chris Olave as well for some running back depth. But, I can see both sides of the argument, as Sebastian also adds. Pretty thin at running back, but the depth I have at receiver, I can make another trade for RB1 or 2. So exactly what I was saying as well. I think in fantasy football, my general thought, especially when you're early on in the season, is acquire as much talent as you can, and then exactly you can make those next moves from there. So, of course, happy to help Sebastian or anybody else as well. If you have fantasy football questions, we're going to be diving into all this upcoming week 3 preview in the fantasy football world. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thursday afternoons are when we typically dive into the weekend preview of fantasy football. So we're going to be starting off. I'm going to be giving my starts and sits for Thursday night football. Be talking about some of my top plays for the weekend at each position. But If you have any questions as well or personal suggestions, happy to talk things out here. But that being said, starting with tonight's Thursday night football game between, of course, the Patriots and the Jets. This is a game that probably isn't going to be super high stakes in terms of your fantasy football week 3 outlook. I feel like there's only really a handful of players that are really, in that must-start category. You start with, the line, we talked about this earlier, is 38.5, so it sounds like Vegas is sort of expecting this to be a lower scoring game. Jets defense is probably a good play sort of on that note as well. Patriots could be, but I do myself have the Jets defense in a league, and I feel pretty confident about that. But starting with the quarterback position, Aaron Rodgers, Jacoby Brissett. Brissett is not really in that consideration anyways. Rodgers is, a tough call. He's fringe. If you are in a tough situation, Aaron Rodgers, you can talk yourself into it. Last week, Geno Smith did have a pretty good production game overall. He was 33 of 44 with a touchdown pass, which was good for about 18 points in terms of standard scoring. The thing is, though, is Geno found a lot of his success in that game sort of when he was scrambling out of the pocket, extending plays and making things happen from there. That I just don't know if I have that confidence in Aaron Rodgers with his lack of mobility at this point. That we did see sort of to that exact same point that last week it was around the second quarter where the Jets sort of started going with those quick hitter plays and those quick decisions, and that's when they started to get their passing game moving a little bit more. So, maybe they could take advantage of that. But I do feel like the Patriots are a pretty talented defense as a whole. They have a good pass rush. I think they're going to put pressure on Rodgers. And still, until I see a little bit more chemistry develop between Rodgers and his receivers, I'm going to have some hesitations there as to how much Rodgers can really do from a fantasy football perspective. He can still lead the Jets to wins, and I think that it's a work in progress there that will eventually get there. But from a fantasy football perspective, if I'm not mistaken, Rodgers is yet to top 200 yards in either game so far. I can double check that here as we speak. I don't want to, be incorrect on that. Rodgers might have, 167 yards week 1, 176 yards in week 2. I don't really expect that to change in a short week against a good Patriots defense. But as to some of the, higher echelon fantasy football players, Breece Hall, he was dealing with a quad injury during the game against the Titans that sort of opened the door for Braylon Allen to get some more touches. But I think with that running back room, there are going to be enough opportunities for the both of them to take advantage of. It was Braylon Allen scoring a couple touchdowns. Breece Hall did still end up having a big week in PPR just based off of the amount of workload that he is going to get there. He is the leading receiver for the Jets in terms of targets up to this point. So I think that Breece Hall is a start in this game, especially if you are in PPR. The fact that he's dealing with this injury and then is heading into a short week does sketch me out a little bit, but ultimately, I think he's going to get the touches to at least be a running back 2 option with, of course, the upside of reaching that RB1 for this week. So I would start Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. If you're also, sort of in a tough situation, I think there's a chance that he could be a flex option for them. Somebody who could, like I just mentioned, benefit from the fact that Breece is dealing with that quad injury. Now, Breece, he's good to go. He's already gotten the green light. There's no question there that he's going to play, but Braylon Allen could, get a little bit more of the workload as Breece deals with this injury. On the other side with the Patriots, Ramondre Stevenson is a start to me. He's going to get a heavy workload that is the clear identity of this Patriots offense. It's what Alex Van Pelt prefers to do anyways, is establish the run game. Add on top of that as well the fact that the pass game isn't all that great yet, and I don't really see it getting to that level with, mediocre wide receivers, a pretty bad blocking offensive line, and Jacoby Brissett at the helm, that I think they are going to continue to try and establish that run game. This is a Jets defense that has been struggling up to this point against the run, and they might be without their leading tackler in C.J. Mosley, who is dealing with a toe injury that he suffered against Tennessee in week 2, that I think there's going to be a clear emphasis, and not to mention as well, talk about the lack of a passing game. The secondary is really what's seen as the Jets' strength from a defensive perspective. So I think that he's going to get the touches and opportunities to do so. I would also throw in the fact that Antonio Gibson could maybe be, I don't think that he's going to have 95 yards on the ground like he did last week against the Seahawks, but I do feel like he could be a flex option if you are in a bind. Receivers, the only one I would really go with here is Garrett Wilson. You're not looking at anybody from the Patriots, obviously, and the lack of depth behind Garrett Wilson is very apparent as well. So I think that Garrett Wilson's a pretty good call there. I'm not anticipating him to put up wide receiver 1 numbers, but I think he can be a good number 2. Now, he is likely going to be shadowed by Christian Gonzalez for a lot of this game. Christian Gonzalez, a lot more Twitter debate than I really would have expected last week based off of his performance. Yeah, he was involved in that blown coverage for DK Metcalf, but I thought he did pretty well, all things considered, against DK, who is, of course, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So, a lot of eyes are going to be surrounding Garrett Wilson. I feel like we could see potentially a Mayo move of being Belichick-esque, of let's take away your best option and see what you can do from there. I think that he's a start, but he's not. I don't necessarily see that wide receiver 1 production from him tonight. But last player that I would take a flyer on is Hunter Henry. Had a big week 2 last week. Probably not, the level of production that ultimately you can expect from him, all things considered, because, Henry, I believe, was the leading receiver for New England last week, just in terms of the amount of targets that he was getting. I mean, the receivers obviously weren't getting anything. I think it was only maybe 3 targets for receivers themselves. It was 5 targets for receivers, and it was just Jalen Polk and KJ Osborne. But Hunter Henry, coming off of a huge week, 8 receptions, 109 yards. The fact that CJ Mosley might be out as well, that's talking about a linebacker that might be matched up against Hunter Henry. Even if he does play, will he have that level of mobility? I think Hunter Henry is a pretty solid play, all things considered, tonight as well. Now I'm going to run through here some of my favorite plays of the week for each position. At quarterback, I have Jalen Hurts against the Saints. The Eagles are going to be looking to have some vengeance this week after getting clowned for their Monday Night Football loss against the Falcons this past week. The Saints have a good defense for sure, but I don't think it's to the point where they're going to fully take away Jalen Hurts. And what we did see in that Monday Night Football game is the fact that Hurts is not afraid whatsoever to run the ball and keep it himself. And that's something that, especially as A.J. Brown remains out, I think will be a possibly prominent part of this Eagles offense for the next handful of weeks. That ultimately, there really is not much receiver depth whatsoever behind Devontae Smith at this point, where it was Covey, I believe, that was the slot receiver and their punt returner that was second in the team in targets. That I feel like Hurts is going to have the rushing upside tonight. There's always the threat of the tush push like he did score on last week. And I think that all things considered, again, good Saints defense. I think that especially on the outside, a lot of promise there from their cornerbacks, but I think the dual threat of Hurts is going to be, and especially for a Hurts that is going to definitely be looking to bounce back this week, I think he's going to have a lot of carries for himself and a lot of opportunities. I would also throw in Kyler Murray as a top play for the weekend playing the Detroit Lions. I still haven't loved what I've seen from their secondary yet up to this point. I think that Terrion Arnold, their number one draft pick this past year that they took in the first round, is eventually going to get there, but he's been struggling up to this point. We saw the Cardinals basically get to take their foot off the gas halfway through the second quarter last week, and now I think it's going to be a much more competitive game against the Lions that can be thrown on. History would tell us. Now, obviously, made all of those additions to the secondary to try and beef that up in Carlton Davis, Amik Robertson, and Terrion Arnold. But all things considered, I still feel like until we see them really shut down opposing quarterbacks, that this is going to be a situation where you're just going to take the dual threat of Kyler Murray now in a complete game here. Aiden Hutchinson would scare any quarterback, but I think that Kyler Murray is going to have himself a day. Running back, top play, I think it's going to be the same guy for a second week in a row, Alvin Kamara against the Eagles. Talking about an Eagles defense as well, that I think there is a pretty clear weakness, and that is in the running game. Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier combined for, I believe it was over 6 yards per carry last week. And I think that the Saints are going to be in a tough one. As excellent as Derek Carr has been up to this point, that I do feel like they're going to, have to be in this one a little bit more. Derek Carr, I'm sure they're going to let him take his shots downfield and such, but I think that the key to this Saints offense is establishing the run. Derek Carr has been excellent playing off of play action, but in order to actually have success doing so, you have to make sure the ground game gets going. I'm a big fan of this Saints offensive line as well, for whatever that's worth, and Kamara, maybe it's a little bit of a square pick to go with the guy that just scored 4 touchdowns last week as the top running back option the next week, but I still feel like it's more of a matchup thing than anything to me based off of playing against the Eagles. I liked Bijan last week playing against the Eagles, and he had a pretty good game for himself. I think Kamara is capable of doing so as well. We're going to fire through these last couple positions here, and then I want to get to Camden's comment here in the comment section here, so bear with me one more moment. Wide receiver, I like Amon-Ra St. Brown against the Cardinals. Now, this is a situation where I feel like we could see the Lions sort of try and revert back to establishing the ground game more. But that being said, you can only do that for so long. And I think that Amon-Ra has a pretty favorable matchup against what is a Cardinals defense that I think their weaknesses really are in the secondary, so I think that that's probably my favorite start there. Chris Olave could also be a pretty nice play. And then tight end, I think it's George Kittle versus the Rams by a pretty significant margin. Talking about Kittle, who's been, really the only top tight end that's fully lived up to expectations, and even week 1 wasn't great for him. But, it's him and Trey McBride are the two, and Trey McBride is another play that I think could be an interesting one here. But Kittle against a Rams team that just feels like they're beat up on right now, but is going to probably try and have a little bit of a bounce back. You have the Shanahan versus McVay rivalry a little bit in this game. Still no Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk hasn't emerged yet, so I do think that Kittle is going to get a lot of touches. All right, now, if you have any questions there, we can circle back around, but I do want to get to Camden's comment here, where his situation, CJ Stroud, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, and Trey McBride. 2 options. Would you rather trade Ramondre for Garrett Wilson or James Conner? Or he's adding some stuff to that. My first thoughts on your proposal there is that if you are going to trade Ramondre in this situation, I do really like Jahmyr Gibbs. I've never really been a Travis Etienne believer quite to the same degree as other people. So I think you'd be leaving yourself a little bit vulnerable at the running back position, and I really like James Conner this season. I think that this Cardinals offense is going to take, a number of steps forward as long as Kyler Murray is available for them. And what we've seen early on is that, they are hoping to establish that run game. Sure, last week you get the fireworks, of course, of Marvin Harrison Jr. in that first quarter. But if you go back to week 1 as well against Buffalo, the only reason the Cardinals were in that game to begin with was because they were running down the Bills' throats. And there's obviously been so much talk, and we're actually going to get to this idea of how opposing defenses are playing these games more in a moment. But, so much talk right now about the idea of establishing the run game with all of these 2 deep safeties, being prevalent early on in the NFL season that, I like Ramondre Stevenson anyways, that I would probably want to hold on to him. He is the focal point of that offense. But if you're giving me 2 options of making a move for Garrett Wilson or James Conner, I would lean with James Conner. Now, again, I don't know if I would necessarily, wholeheartedly go for Ramondre for James Conner. That does feel like a little bit of a lateral move. 2 running backs that I do really like. James Conner is at least overall in a better offense, but you do also, and I know Ramondre missed the second half of last season. That was a little bit of a freak injury coming on a hip drop tackle. James Conner does have a little bit more of an extensive injury history, so I do feel like that's something that you do have to take into consideration. So looked like Camden here was maybe going to add to that proposal. We can maybe come back around that if there is more to the conversation, but as for now, we're going to be moving on here. I just sort of prefaced it a little bit, but earlier this morning there was a very large debate that sort of emerged on social media as Mel Kiper Jr. of ESPN went on Get Up and was advocating for the NFL to ban 2 deep safeties, a specific type of coverage for defenses. We'll sort of, it's mostly straightforward, but for those who don't know, we'll sort of explain it more on the other side here. So we are going to be diving into this very interesting and surprising debate and talking about, just generally speaking, whether or not it is something that could be implemented in the future. But before we do that, we are going to have to take our final break of the show. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where earlier this morning there was a very controversial debate that broke out based off of Mel Kiper Jr.'s appearance on ESPN's Get Up. Mel Kiper Jr., one of the best in terms of NFL draft analysis, but he went on a little bit of a rant this morning in regards to the slow start to offenses across the league, and he blames it on the fact that we have seen an uptick in opposing defenses dropping their safeties back more, playing two deep safeties, which is basically what it sounds like, having your safeties drop back playing cover 2 or a cover 4 with that, and basically trying to take away the deep ball from opposing offenses and force them to sort of work the middle of the field a little bit more. And as a result, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks up to this point struggle to do so, because as much arm talent as there is, you look at the likes of an Anthony Richardson or a Will Levis, who, guys that have an incredible arm talent, we've also seen them struggle a lot more when you're talking about those intermediate throws and the decision making. As Vic Locke in the comment section here already argues, it's the worst take ever, which I'm with you. I'm right there with you. It is such an absurd sort of path to take in this direction, because yes, we can all understand that, watching offense playing at its best is massively exciting. But that being said, to handicap opposing defenses just because you want the game to look better is an insane strategy. The NFL is constantly evolving, and, Mel Kiper, again, I greatly respect the work that he does in terms of draft analysis, but, he was sort of dating himself, talking about how he grew up on what he called the golden age of the NFL, where it's the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and this idea that taking those deep shots. And the reality of the situation is, it's exciting, and I feel like it couldn't have been that prominent necessarily in the 80s. Maybe I have to do some research more, but in comparison to what we were seeing, especially late 2010s and the early 2020s, when the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen were really emerging and just being able to, those years of Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill of just saying, Tyreek's out there somewhere and just letting it rip downfield and ultimately resulting in touchdowns. Yes, it's massively exciting, but our defense is just supposed to sort of sit on their hands and allow that to happen. I think that concept is, ridiculous. And, I just more so, I guess, on his argument itself, he's talking about it's a beautiful thing to watch, these deep shots, and how this new brand of football is boring with the bubble screens and all of these short passes. The thing about the NFL that I think makes it sort of stand out among all other sports is it is the ultimate combination of strategy and pure athleticism, where, you look across other leagues, and it's not to take away from a sport like basketball. I love the NBA, but a lot of the times it can just be, all right, we're going to isolate our best player and he's going to get us the best shot. Or we're just going to run a pick and roll, get a mismatch, and have them just work the mismatch. Football is just this constant chess game of you do this, I'm going to do this. And you have to make those adaptations. And that's where, the NFL used to be a running league. And then when we got all these new arm talents and, speedsters on the perimeter, we saw the game take a step. But that's always the constant give and take between offenses and defenses in the NFL, is things are always evolving. And I think there are a lot of different things that bake into this. If you want to say running the ball is boring, maybe football just isn't really the sport for you. Go watch flag football, I suppose, if that's the hill that you are willing to die on. But I just, it's a part of the game. It's a very important part of the game is, establishing the run game. And I thought that Chase Daniels, of course, former NFL quarterback, made an excellent point that I do think is one of the underlying stories with this as well, is the fact that offensive line play over the past handful of years has just gotten worse. And ESPN, as they were talking about this situation as well, this was, I think it was ESPN with Mina Kimes last week, the average depth of intended targets have been dropping year by year. And I think that part of that as well, sure, it's that you have more deep safeties playing back and trying to keep things in front of you. But at the same time, it's also the fact that quarterbacks have less and less time, it feels like, to actually deliver the ball. And I feel like I was looking into it a little bit as well, because when you look on the defensive side of the ball, I think where we have seen some of the most innovation over the past handful of years is just how much of freak athletes we're getting on that front of the defensive line that are just ruining game plans for opposing teams. Where if you go back, 9 of the last 10 Defensive Player of the Year awards that were handed out have been to elite pass rushers, where you go Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, JJ Watt. The only, player to win Defensive Player of the Year in the past decade that didn't have double-digit sacks is Stephon Gilmore in 2019. It's just a little bit of a rarity at this point, and I think that it's doing a better job of sort of coaching up that offensive line and finding a way to make opposing teams respect the run game. I think that the Saints are actually a little bit, and this is obviously based off of 2 weeks, so it's not like you can draw any conclusive statements from this, but you look at what the Saints are doing, and they are having so much success right now running the ball with Alvin Kamara and then working off of that with the play action pass. It's this idea of putting Derek Carr under center, forcing opposing defenses to come up a little bit more, and then every once in a while you get those opportunities for the deep shots where Carr has hit Rashid Shaheed on those go routes, those beautiful plays that Mel Kiper was talking about. You get those opportunities eventually, but you kind of have to earn them. If you are going to ban the 2 deep safeties and basically just gift wrap touchdowns to the offense, I think we've really lost the plot with what football is all about, and it's strategy, and it's finding ways to overcome what the other side is trying to, capitalize on. And Vic Lock, puts it well as well. The solution is to ground and pound efficiently and better offensive line. The offensive line issue, I think, is a real problem at this point in the NFL. And it's not that I think that linemen have just gotten so much worse. It's that I feel like for whatever reason it may be, and I think it's some of the modern age of, just producing better athletes overall, but defensive linemen are just killers at this point. And you look at the likes of an Aiden Hutchinson who, single-handedly almost, disrupted so much of what Tampa Bay was trying to do last week. I thought their secondary didn't look all that good, but ultimately, 20 points isn't a little scoring. Like, that's still a decent sample size, but the Buccaneers could have had way more if it weren't for the fact that Aiden Hutchinson was basically living in the backfield. And it took some really impressive play from Baker. That's where you also see Baker on his touchdown run, running a quarterback draw. Like, those types of things as well, is just trying to confuse the defense, get them to act a certain way so that you can sort of throw the counterpunch. And again, I just feel like this idea of, I don't even know what it would be in terms of banning this. Is it banning the coverage? Is it banning where the safeties are allowed to line up pre-snap? The entire concept to me is just ridiculous. And, I can't imagine there's going to be very much traction on this idea of actually banning. But yeah, as Vic says, it is a joke. Jason McCourty tweeted out later, responding to the clip that came out, saying, I should have just walked off the set. And, as a defensive player as well with McCourty, I can't blame him at all, because it was outrageous. If you haven't watched the clip, I'd, recommend going to see it just to give yourself a laugh. It's not a serious take that I think you can put any real stock into, but, just the faces of everybody sitting there, it's like, what is this guy talking about? It's a crazy thing. And, the NFL, we know that they love offense. Like, that is ultimately what sort of sells highlights and stuff, is watching those types of deep shots. So, it's not like Mel is totally off base that, he is kind of like maybe the passive public in terms of wanting to see those types of plays, having those be the exciting moments. But again, if you're not willing to stick it out through the trenches and through, sort of the other aspects of the game, football just might not be your thing. And I know that football is Mel Kiper's thing. He's made an excellent career out of it. So, I don't want to dump on him any further. I'm sure the entire internet, that's the direction they're going, and deservingly so. It was a horrendous take that he's going to face the backlash a little bit, and we're just going to move over this. The important thing is the NFL, just don't get any stupid ideas in your head, because that would be, I think, detrimental to the league in terms of how much we could actually respect it if they say, oh, well, this part of defense is too good, so we're just going to cop out and force our way out of it. That's a ridiculous strategy. But, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Again, I feel like we can move off of this pretty confidently and not have to worry about it for the foreseeable future. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to all the viewers who are contributing in the comment section. Always love to make this show as interactive as possible and get your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. But as for now, that is all the time we have. So we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, wherever you may be keeping up with us. And we will see you tomorrow with reactions on tonight's Thursday night football game. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.